You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Welcome to Inside Julia's Kitchen, the podcast, the Julia Child Foundation for Gastronomy and the Culinary Arts. I'm your host, Todd Shulkin, the Foundation's Executive Director. Our show takes you inside the Foundation's world to meet the talented people we have the good fortune of learning from all the time. On today's show, we welcome Napa Valley Museum Executive Director Laura Rafaty. In this episode, we'll talk to Laura about the Julia Child Recipe for Life exhibition, Julia's return to Napa, and we'll hear Laura's second Julia moment. Stay with us. We'll be right back. As always, we launch the conversation with an inspiration from Julia. A recurring theme of this show is not only that Julia has an enduring legacy, but that Julia's life story continues to inspire people some 20 years after her death at the age of almost 92. Another surprise is that despite the myriad movies, TV shows, and museum exhibitions about Julia, none of them are beginning to end biographical portraits. That exists in book form, but hasn't otherwise been brought to life, at least until very recently. Thanks to the inspiration and considerable effort of today's guest, the first complete telling of Julia's life story and her path to fame has been brought to life in collaboration with the international touring exhibition company Flying Fish. Opening at the Henry Ford Museum in Detroit in May 2023, Julia Child, A Recipe for Life covers Julia's legacy through immersive experiences and interactive exhibits which chronicle her life, career, and influence. It has so far graced Omaha, Richmond, Virginia, Jackson, Michigan, and is currently on view at the Cincinnati Museum Center. The opportunity to see this exhibition is about to expand, which brings us to welcoming Laura back to the podcast to share some exciting Julia news. Laura is the executive director of the Napa Valley Museum, and since 2017, she has transformed it into a nationally recognized incubator for innovative original exhibitions and touring productions. Most recently, Laura has overseen the museum's expansion to a new flagship location, the Napa Valley Museum of Art and Culture, to also be known as the MAC, opening soon in St. Helena, having outgrown its original space in Yountville. An attorney with over 40 years' experience as an arts executive and nonprofit board member, Laura is also a Tony-nominated theatrical producer. She's the founder of Napa Shakes, which brings professional Shakespeare productions to Napa Valley. We first spoke to Laura back in episode 194 about Recipe for Life's debut at the Henry Ford. But she's back today to share the latest exciting news about the exhibition, as well as share her insights about Julia's enduring appeal. Welcome back to the podcast, Laura.
Thanks, Todd.
So why don't we start with, can you give us a refresher and a little bit more detail in general about what the Julia Child Recipe for Life exhibition is all about, since you were pretty much involved in its birth?
Well, the Julia Child exhibition, A Recipe for Life, it explores the key ingredients in Julia's journey, kind of what became part of, drove her to basically revolutionize America's culinary landscape. And it's a lot of immersive experiences that really kind of take you inside that life story of Julia Child, but also capture her contributions to the culinary industry as well as the broadcasting one.
Well, maybe we should go back a little bit in time and remind everyone of the backstory of sort of how this broader exhibition of Julia's life even came to life and what the Napa Valley Museum's connection to it is.
Well, the museum back in 2017 presented an exhibition called France is a Feast, the photographic journey of Paul and Julia Child. And that was curated by Katie Pratt. And it relied heavily on text that was created by Alex Pradum, who I'm sure your listeners know well, I assume. And it was really focused on France and on Paul and Julia's relationship there and their life in France. And it was such an incredibly popular exhibition. We ended up taking it to the Culinary Institute here in Napa, but we knew that there was a real curiosity to learn more. So we looked around and got some great recommendations and settled on Flying Fish, who are really one of the most respected touring producers in the world. And I basically raised the money, and we pulled all the elements together and worked with the foundation and the Schlesinger Library to get all the assets lined up. And a new exhibition was sort of conceived and born.
But there are some kind of key differences. Like you were saying, France and the Feast had a very kind of specific, more narrow focus. And one of the things that when we started the conversation with Flying Fish, they proposed, I think it was them, said, can we do something more comprehensive?
Absolutely. Well, they wanted to focus more on Julia as sort of a broadcasting pioneer. And I had always envisioned the exhibition as the Recipe for Life exhibition as being sort of built around the television studio. And letting people sort of be part of that, of Julia's television show, since that's how so many people know her, in addition to her cookbooks. But the key differences really are, A Recipe for Life is really, in addition to this shift of focus from Paul's accomplishments as a talented photographer to focus on Julia as a broadcasting and culinary pioneer. There really is, it's sort of supersized. We have 2,300 square feet of exhibition space in our Yountville museum where this started. And this is a 5,000 square foot exhibition with huge, larger than life components, a giant interactive version of the Mastering the Art of French Cooking cookbook. There's an interactive studio kitchen with a video camera. You can get in there and put on your apron. You can cook up some great French food. There's televisions, there's interactive elements all over the exhibition. So it really is a much bigger and much more immersive experience than our essentially photography exhibition, which Katie knew Paul when she was a child, and he had trusted her with a number of personal artifacts and things. So she was able to really bring his studio to life in our museum. Here, it's just a much bigger and more immersive experience.
Well, and I think some of the backstory that's interesting too is that while the photographs that were on exhibit, which are very beautiful black and white photos, mostly taken in the 1950s, some of Julia's, some of just French culture and countryside that Paul did, is you and Katie added these elements that were more interactive, like standing next to Julia, writing your own recipe message to her. And I feel like one of the learnings was that people really embraced that experience as well. And it seemed like there was this greater potential left on the table of the public wanting to sort of interact with Julia and her story.
I think that's a great point. We ended up having to record people, not having to, but getting to record people, because everybody seemed to have a Julia story, or they had a Julia impression, or both, that they wanted to do. So we ended up capturing a lot of people on video, and in the new Recipe for Life exhibition, you can do that on camera with an authentic television studio.
So we've kind of been skirting around it, but I think we might as well get to the exciting news. So you've been mentioning things in sort of vague terms, but why don't you break the exciting news of what's happening now and what you've been working on for this next chapter in the Recipe for Life journey?
I'm assuming that you're referring to our opening it at the MAC, at the Museum of Art and Culture in Napa.
Correct.
Oh, good. What could be more exciting than that? So the Napa Valley Museum has been around for over 50 years. Started in St. Helena, and then it we opened a museum about 35 years ago, I guess, in Yountville. And I don't know if your listeners know Yountville, but they'll probably know it best as the home of the French Laundry, Thomas Keller's restaurant, and several other Thomas Keller restaurants. At one point, there were more Michelin stars per capita in Yountville than anywhere else in the country, which is really kind of shocking. But
it's also because Yountville is a small place, but it did have an over-indexing amount of top restaurants.
It did. Yes, because it had Michael Chiarello, and it had the Domaine Chandon had a Michelin star, and there was Richard Reddington, and there were just a lot of people all sort of squeezed in there. And there still are. It's an amazing culinary capital, but for a teeny little town. But we had always the thing about our museum was that it is a little bit off the beaten path, to say the least. So we had always wanted to find ways to expand our reach, and so when we basically took over an old Dean and DeLuca building, which is on Highway 29, the main drag in Napa Valley. And it's right next door to Press Restaurant, which is a Michelin star restaurant with the chef Philippe Tessier. And so we are opening on April 18th with a brand new Napa Valley Museum of Art and Culture, or the MAC. And that's not going to close Yountville. Yountville will stay very much open, because we've got a lot of amazing exhibitions going there, and we'll continue to do that. But this will essentially allow us to showcase our biggest and brightest, and that right now, of course, is focused on Julia Child, A Recipe for Life.
So tell us more about the tenure of like what the plan you have in store, because it's a little bit unique to your venue, and maybe also tell us a little bit more about, because I think it's kind of exciting, the reasons why there's basically going to be a second touring company, for lack of I don't know what Flying Fish calls it.
I call it a production unit because I come from theater, so I never know what to call anything. But it's probably, it's a second. Basically, the original Julia touring exhibition, A Recipe for Life, is booked out to museums for over 7 years. I think we may be more like 8 at this point. So it's completely unavailable. And so we raised funding from some champions, including the Kuo Family Fund, who were just amazingly generous to us and allowed us to build a second company. And that way we were able to put it down in Napa, in St. Helena, opening on April 18th. It will run there until March 8th of 2026. And at that point, it will be able to tour other cities that wouldn't have been able to have it had we not done this. And I should say the original Julia 1.0 was and is sponsored by Oceania Cruises, who were similarly wonderful to us. And in opening the new MAC Museum, we were given our first seed money from the Ron and Diane Disney Miller Fund. And they've been, again, it's just the whole community has sort of come together to make this happen. And being able to tell them that Julia was coming was so exciting for everyone. Everyone in the Napa Valley has a connection to Julia, but because they're chefs and winemakers and everybody are thick on the ground. And she spent a fair amount of time as one of the original proponents of the Culinary Institute here, with Bob Mondavi and others. So she's well-loved here, but she's well-loved everywhere, let's face it.
But I think you didn't put too fine a point on it that I think you were optimistic that the original Francis Affice photography exhibit of Paul's photos would be popular, but I think it's fair to say it wildly exceeded expectations, which kind of launched you on this journey about feeling like there's more there. Do you think that's
absolutely? Oh, that's absolutely true. I mean, we were stunned at how much people embraced the original exhibition, but again, it was, we're a small museum in Yountville, and so we knew that people were there's an appetite for more Julia, but we had no idea. I mean, when this exhibition opened at the Henry Ford Museum in May of 23, I think 10,000 people walked through the door the first weekend, and over 400,000 people have seen the exhibition at this point, just since that date. I mean, it's really, and the thing is, the demographics of who are coming and who are enjoying it that's really surprised me. A lot of young people just loved Julia. A lot of men love Julia. Kids really enjoy the exhibition because they can cook in the TV studio. They can sit in the bathtub and recreate Paul and Julia's Valentine. I mean, there's something for pretty much every age and every interest level. And if you're not interested in cooking or food, which, I mean, who isn't interested in food? You might be interested in the history of broadcasting. You might be interested in travel to France. You might be interested in Julia and Paul's life in the do you say OSS? Is that correct, Todd? Is that and because they had a fascinating experience in the war, or you might just be interested in the fact that somehow Julia managed to use so many cubes of butter that it's kind of shocking that that she was as healthy and robust as she was.
Oh, it helps being 6'3" to process all that butter. It's a superpower. But yes, no, I think her family says they were all blessed with a very good, both height and a good metabolism. And most importantly, Julia would say a hearty appetite. And I think that's been really both amazing and gratifying to the foundation to see how much people have embraced this. And I think when people ask me, who is the Recipe for Life exhibition for, that's been one of my learnings and finding that it's a really great multi-generational experience. But that, yes, it's often a middle-aged parent or grandparent or adult saying, let's go, but that kids of all ages enjoy it and get different things out of it at different ages. And, it's hard. There's not a lot of things that work on that level that you can do as a family out and about.
Oh, you're so right. And it's kind of like the way that, so a lot of guys will tell me that the only way that they could relate to their dad was through, watching a football game with them or whatever. A lot of people tell us that this is, especially men have told me that they became chefs or they became interested in cooking because they cooked with their mothers. I remember Anthony Bourdain told stories about that, I believe. Todd, isn't that right? And based on Julia's book, that he and his mother both shared a love for Julia Child's cookbook. And so, it's a bonding experience with mothers often, which is a good thing to talk about with Women's History Month upon us.
Yeah, no, for sure. I've definitely interviewed chefs and heard chefs talk. I don't remember specifically about Anthony Bourdain, but that is a common refrain of having cooked with their mom or with their grandmother. It's kind of an interesting thing, this whole gender dynamic around cooking and being a chef, because certainly in France, being a chef meant you were a man and you went and trained as a man. And there's certainly the famous story, which is captured in part in the exhibition, of Julia going to the Cordon Bleu and taking the class with the GIs, because that was the only quote unquote serious professional class available. And normally women weren't in it. So I think there's this very funny dialectic between women on the home front and having that expertise and men on the professional front having that expertise. And I think we've been going through in the last 50 years a very big shift in that kind of delineation. And, in many ways, the exhibition captures Julia's journey within those two realms.
That's an interesting point. That's true. I mean, it's sort of, you do see more dads trying to achieve some culinary excellence, outside of the barbecue milieu these days. And I think that they buy cookbooks. I was actually reading some statistics on that men are a part of the cookbook audience as well. So there's another thing about Julia. If I can talk about women's history for a bit here.
You brought it up, so I'm just following you along. Go ahead.
I did, but we're at the Yonville Museum right now. We're doing an exhibition of these botanical watercolors by Sophie Alstrom Mitchell, who was active in the 19th century. She was a Victorian artist, and it's been so interesting to see these two women side by side at our two museums as we're getting ready to launch the second one, because it made me. Sophie is somebody who's, even though she lived long ago, is a very modern person in a way. Even though she was a minister's wife, and she had a lot of constraints at the time, but she definitely is someone that you would expect to run into walking down the street. And Julia is kind of that way. She her message isn't aging. So much of what other people have created who are sort of like Julia in terms of prominence and influence, that it's gotten a little old fashioned. And there's nothing about Julia that I think couldn't be perfectly adaptable to today. She could just come right back tomorrow, which I wish she would, and pick up where she left off. Don't you think?
I do. I love that observation. I think that is part of the Julia mystique, is that there's something evergreen about what she represented, or that just means society hasn't changed that much. But I think there are many aspects that we talk about being endlessly inspiring in her journey and what she represents. All right, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back with more from Laura Rafaty from the Napa Valley Museum. Stay with us. Join us for the 2025 Santa Barbara Culinary Experience. It's coming up soon, May 12th to 18th. We're back all across Santa Barbara County, bigger than ever, with more than 70 different culinary-inspired events. There's special dinners, a wide array of cooking, mixology, and wine blending classes, farm and vineyard tours, as well as our signature Grand Wine Tasting, which brings together more than 40 wineries from across the county to the historic El Presidio in the center of downtown Santa Barbara. Tickets are on sale now and selling fast. Follow at SB Culinary Experience on Instagram for the latest updates, and sign up for the mailing list and get your tickets on sbce.events. We'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Plugra European-style butter, crafted for those who demand precision and exceptional results in the kitchen. With 82% butter fat and a slow churn process, Plugra gives you flakier crusts, fluffier cakes, and rich, melt-in-your-mouth pastries. Because great baking starts with great butter. Unlike standard American butters, which have only 80% butter fat, Plugra ensures the ideal moisture and fat balance so your recipes turn out just right every time. That's why professional chefs trust Plugra and home bakers love it. Plugra's slow churn process creates a smooth, creamy butter that gives dough a soft, pliable texture, making rolling, folding, and laminating effortless. Whether you're perfecting a buttery pie crust or layering a delicate croissant, Plugra helps you bake with confidence. Experience the difference for yourself. Find Plugra in stores near you or visit plugra.com. That's Plugra.com.
Welcome back. We're talking to Napa Valley Museum Executive Director Laura Rafaty about the Julia Child Recipe for Life exhibition and Julia's Napa Valley connection. So, Laura, we were going down a women's history rabbit hole, but I think obviously Julia, I mean, we've had many requests at the Foundation for information or people doing articles about Julia or including Julia in lists for women's history. So I think, it's really apropos. She stands as a kind of, definite figure or maybe even like a touchstone. Did you want to add to that sort of your views?
Only that we were talking about, her enduring, her timelessness. And I do think that from my opinion anyway, one of the reasons for that is authenticity, is the fact that she was so completely authentic to who she was. And I think as long as, in that way, it really can't age. She wasn't a poser. She wasn't trying to cater to the whims of the time. And she was also, one of the things I like about this exhibition is that I always say that Julie had a lot of, method to her magic, because a lot of people have a misapprehension about or misunderstanding of her because they think of her as the person that dropped the omelet or who was silly or with that big laugh of hers. But we know how incredibly meticulous she was in testing and retesting every single component. And it also brings out something that was one of my favorite aspects of learning her story. And that is because she had sort of this past working around this sort of secret OSS kinds of operations, how sort of spy versus spy she was in protecting the secrets of the cookbook while it was being developed. I love all of that. So anyway, I think that she was just such an incredibly unique individual, and it really comes through. But I want to talk about something else that you just brought up. Let's talk about so you were mentioning the Santa Barbara culinary experience during the break.
Yeah.
I don't know where your listeners are geographically, but I hope that if
they're
they have
everywhere, all over the world.
Well, if you haven't had a chance to be in Santa Barbara, it is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And I say that as someone who's sitting in the Napa Valley right now, which is also
who already lives in one of the most beautiful places in the world. Another one.
But really, Santa Barbara is extraordinary because it gets the ocean. You get to throw the ocean on top of all of that. And but and you talked about 40 wineries being at the event. And right now, the wineries are kind of obviously in the Napa Valley, they're front and center on everything that we think about, and the culinary achievements of all the amazing restaurants. But there's this puritanical streak that's come out right now that I think Julia wouldn't really like. This sort of, oh, wine's bad for you, and rich food is bad for you, and those kinds of things that have suddenly sort of overtaken people's enjoyment of wine and food, and I'm really always embracing anyone who just wants to fight back on that kind of. We don't need that. There's enough negativity in the world without saying that you can't have a nice glass of Cabernet every once in a while, and I still think it's good for you. I mean, people have been drinking since 6000 BC. It turns out. Probably before that, I've been drinking wine. And so I don't know. I don't know what you think about that, but I feel like if Julia was here today, she would just be amused by perhaps this new puritanical streak that has overtaken the food and wine industry.
Yeah, it's interesting. I certainly appreciate everything you're saying. And I would say that Julia would, I agree, be alarmed that winemakers were saying, that sales are way down, and they're potentially, certainly from the conversations I've had with winemakers in the wine industry, they're expecting contraction because wine sales post-pandemic have really dropped. And there is this data that shows that younger people are much less interested in consuming wine and more concerned about their health and drinking less alcohol as a whole. I would say in some ways, though, Julia was never an advocate for drinking's sake or for partying or going out. And, wine has not really ever been a component of it, and it's not good for overconsumption. And I think Julia's advocacy was very much for the art and sophistication of winemaking as this thing, like you said, that goes back to what is now the Republic of Georgia 6,000 years ago. And in a good way, I feel like if it's lasted this long, it's going to be around forever. But I think there might be a reframing of how to appreciate it, and that you don't need to drink it in large quantities because you're depressed about the news, but you can learn to appreciate how it's made and how it interacts with, food, or the amount of, I think one thing we like to talk about in Santa Barbara with the culinary experience is, hey, by the way, did you know that wine actually comes from a farm, and that to make wine, you have to be a farmer? And I think, to me, that gets very lost in the whole conversation. So so I think that's a great part of the education of learning more about what it takes to make wine, why it matters, how it fits with food, and how you can sort of separate it from maybe like partying or going out culture.
Absolutely. And the partying culture is always with us. Napa Valley has become a big center for bridal parties, bachelorette parties and things like that. So we're always aware. But yeah, I mean, Julie used to, on her television show, didn't she, set the table and poured a little glass of wine to go with whatever she was going to be serving?
Well, and for sure. And that was incredibly intentional. It was not just on a whim. It was part of her advocacy, having moved from France, that this was part of a culinary tradition that she thought should be treasured and valued, and that people needed to better understand the connection between the two, that wine making and wine drinking wasn't about just, in quotes, drinking. It was about the whole full kind of culinary experience, which also, spirits can be. It's no secret that Paul and Julia like their cocktails too. But no, I think that's a great thing to bring up. And I do think you're correct that any movement away from the enjoyment aspects and the appreciation aspects of good food and wine concerned Julia. She was very adamant about avoiding the fat police. And if you look back at cookbooks in the late 80s and stuff, they were all, even when they were trying not to be, they were still having to address fat reduction and not eating and eating everything fat free, much of which the benefits have been debunked. But these things are seem to be eternal in society.
There's always those fake quotes of Julia, but in moderation, is that actually a Julia quote?
Well, Julia said that. She was quoting Oscar Wilde, though.
Oh, okay. Well, that's almost Julia.
The full quote is everything in moderation, even moderation.
Gotcha.
But I'm pretty sure it's Oscar Wilde who said that first.
But the thing that's neat about this, sort of a parallel between the two, the culinary and the wine too, is that Julia wasn't about putting a giant slab of beef on the table so much. I mean, good ingredients were the key, right? Going and getting that fresh piece of fish that day at the market and serving it up. And people aren't coming to the Napa Valley and the wines are expensive. You're having a small taste of them. You're not going to pour a fairly small pour when you're eating dinner. And a place like Press, which is the restaurant next door to us, which is it's incredible. Is Alex Prudhomme and I actually had dinner there, and it was fun. I mean, they curated every course, and there were many of them with a different small taste of alcohol, including beer, including sake, I believe. And it just really gave you an appreciation for how those pairings work. But of course, we're here in Napa where terroir is the thing, and terroir was a thing. I mean, French food just tastes different in France. California food tastes different. I mean, because it's grown there, like you say, the wines are farmed. They're grown in the soil, and there's definitely that terroir aspect of the food and the wine, which I think Julia embraced.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes from a French concept that people appreciate more widely in other places and highlight. So let's go back to the place, because I don't want to leave out talking about some of the fun things about the exhibit. You mentioned There's the giant copy of Mastering the Art of French Cooking. That means you can actually look and study the book with lots of people around you. There's the kitchen set from the French chef where you can put yourself or your kid on camera cooking. But I thought you might want to highlight your favorite elements, as well as talk about that in each stop, the Flying Fishes encourage the individual museums to add a piece of local content and local flavor, which they've all done in very creative and interesting ways, and you will be doing again in Napa Valley. So tell us more about both your favorite elements and then some of the things you're excited to include that are specific to Napa Valley Museum.
Well, this ties in very well to what we were just talking about, because one of my favorite elements is the La Couronne restaurant immersive experience, which recreates that dinner that Julia and Paul had, where she and you see the dining table, you see this augmented reality, I think is the correct way of referring to it, where the dinner is projected onto the plate. You hear the maitre d' offering them wine. You hear everyone's reaction to the food. It's just, it really brings you right there to France, which I love. There's also a Dear Julia interactive where people can write messages to Julia Child, and I think people are going to love that. There's an interactive screens where you can learn about assembling menus for, salade niçoise and things like that, and many photo opportunities throughout the exhibition. We've added a couple of elements. One is that her great friend Warren Winiarski from Stag's Leap had, during his lifetime, acquired her demonstration kitchen. Julia pioneered the use of mirrors in demonstrating cooking, so that she would be able to, and you could maybe speak more authoritatively than I could on this topic, but my understanding is anyway that she was one of the first people who ever did that, and she would not only on her television show, but when she would be demonstrating in person, she would use this traveling set. It's really a table, and it's got a mirror that's on top of it, and you can see her hands, and you can see the tabletop, and you can see what she's doing in a really kind of creative way. So we've got that. And we had one wall that was sort of left over. And so we decided to bring out some of the framed prints from the original Francis of Feast exhibition, so that people can see some of Paul's snapshots of, or snapshots is not the right word, some of his extraordinary photographs of Julia and their time together in France. One of my favorite anecdotes about that is really that she was such a tall woman that he would use her as a camera stand and windbreak at times when they were out there shooting some of these photos, which I just think is adorable. And there's a great photo in I don't think it's in the exhibition now because it's on our wall, but of her at the top of the spiral staircase. And what a lot of people don't know is that she had just dropped a plucked chicken from the very top of that spiral staircase right before that photo was taken. So she was a character. And we try to capture that with some of the special things that we're adding.
I think I know the photograph you're talking about. I don't know the thing about the plucked chicken. Why was she dropping a plucked chicken? Do you know?
I don't know why. That's my understanding is that that's what she was doing just the moments before that image was snapped. So.
Well, I think that actually is a good segue to one of the last questions I wanted to ask you, which is about, and you were talking about this before without saying it specifically, but I think that the thing, and it's a very French expression that Julia had, was this joie de vivre, joy of life. And that just permeated everything Julia did. She just was naturally a fun person and a clever person. And she brought that to everything she did. And I think she also wanted to share that with people as well. She wanted to bring that out in others. And as the person who really, kicked off and saw this whole potential for having this museum exhibit about Julia, we should say, her kitchen is in the Smithsonian National Museum of American History in Washington. But that exhibit is quite specific to the kitchen, why it was important, and it extrapolates to why Julia was important. But it's kind of much more narrowly focused than telling Julia's story from beginning to end. And so I was curious what for you, and we talked a little bit about it with women's history, but what is it about Julia's life story that you see? What are the key things that make it continue to resonate so strongly and appeal to, as we were talking about, new generations?
Well, it's a great question, and there's so many things about her story that resonate with people. But for me, right now, in many ways, I think it's the right story at the right time, because it is a story of resilience. It's a story of someone who was told that she couldn't join the army. She could go to the women's corps because she was too tall. She couldn't be in the men's, a professional chef. She couldn't do this or that. And she always defied that. And not in a mean, combative, militant way, but just in, quality will out and effort and basically excellence will find its way and will find an audience. And I think that's an important thing. And, Todd, better than anybody, that we've had some struggles in bringing this exhibition into life since 2017. It's never easy to operate an arts institution or to launch an entirely new creative endeavor. But Alex took me aside once and just said, don't worry about this, Laura. It's going to be fine. Julia people are always going to care about this story. Julia is always going to be with us. And he was right about that. I mean, I think people will look at this and say, yeah, sure, there were terrible things happening at some of the time. There was the McCarthy eras. There was the war. There was terrible stuff that is happening. But you don't get it. But you just see, and I hate to keep using the word resilience, but you just see that over and over again, that she just rose above and for whatever reason, it just never seemed to dampen her enthusiasm for life and for the work. And I'm sure that, Paul was a big part of that because she had that rock, underlying everything that she was doing and cheering her on and how lucky she was to have that. But also it was just, I think, baked into her that she was going to do it her way. And if she was going to, and that was going to be the best way, and people were going to appreciate it. And they do to this day.
No, I think that's very well said. I would say one of the other words that comes up to me that's a recurring theme is perseverance. She really persevered through so much stuff. And even after she, she kind of lost Paul before he actually died because he had I'm not sure if it was exactly a stroke, but stroke-like symptoms. So he, even in his last sort of several years of life, was diminished in a way that he couldn't support her anymore and that she had to look after him. But she persevered through that. And she had, like you said, it's not like her life was easy all the time, and some terrible things happened, but she persevered. So I really appreciate you sharing that. We're going to take another break, and when we come back, we'll hear Laura's second Julia moment. Let us know what you think of today's show. Send us an email or a voice memo to contact@juliachildfoundation.org. We'll be right back.
When you flip anything, you just have to have the courage of your convictions, particularly if it's sort of a loose mass like this. Well, that didn't go very well. See, when I flipped it, I didn't have the courage to do it the way I should have. But you can always pick it up, and if you're alone in the kitchen, who is going to see?
From Julia's immortal words, we move into our last segment, which we call the Julia moment. Here's when we ask our guests to share their favorite Julia memory, moment, or how she might have inspired them in their career. All right, Laura, for posterity, what's your second Julia moment?
Oh, my goodness. Well, this one is a little harder for me because I've been trying to really think about it. And the truth is that I don't have a second Julia moment. I have more of a Paul moment, I think.
Okay.
Which is sort of related in that, because perhaps, Katie did such a thoughtful job with the original exhibition, and Alex's words were just so vivid. And I'm still totally PTSD about the end of Paul's story. And as you just related it, I really had a connection to their romance, to their relationship and their romance, and seeing. I experienced Julia to a large degree as someone who was in love with Paul, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so, to me, so there's this wonderful HBO series that you were involved with, Todd. That I should say that you're one of the producers of. Am I allowed to say that? You can.
Yes,
and it was
a documented fact. Yeah.
Okay, good. And people love that show. And I started to watch it, and I couldn't. I couldn't get very far in it. Not that I didn't want to, and someday I will. But I have such a clear vision of Paul in my head that I couldn't have another Paul in my head. I and nothing against the actor who plays him in it, because he's one of my favorite actors. But it's just their life together was just so vivid in my mind that I need to keep Paul as the guy who was Julia's Paul, and I can't. I just don't. There's no room for another one.
And what is it about Julia's Paul in your mind that's so, like, tell us more about the Paul that you cherish?
The Paul that I cherish was never for a nanosecond, as far as I could tell, threatened by Julia's success. That he really embraced it. That he wanted her to be the best and fullest version of herself. And that because they shared such incredible intellect and curiosity about the world and joy in every second of it, he saw it as additive and not in any way taking away, as far as I could tell. Anyway, and whether it's bringing her this mortar and pestle, or the French that original cookbook in French that she couldn't read. He tried in every way to support what she wanted to do, and I just love that about him. Plus, the two of them seem to be how do I put this? They were just very passionate people in every aspect of the word, and I think that passion was something that they both shared, and that you could taste it in their food and in every recipe. And so I really cherish that relationship and what it brought to the world.
Well, I think that's, again, really well said and well put about Paul. I think it's very true. And I think it was interesting while you were explaining that, I was thinking about how strongly they loved each other, and that his wanting to support her was born very strongly out of just his deep love and respect for her, which I think everyone covets from a partner. But I also think what's interesting about that story, which is, again, part of the enduring legacy and learning of Julia's story, is they didn't even like each other very much at first. And so it goes counter to this whole idea that, like, oh, it was love at first sight and da-da-da-da. No, they had to, like, be friends first, and they almost begrudgingly hung out together because they were stationed abroad in the war. And, it was something born out of learning about each other. It wasn't some instantaneous magic that I think people have been possibly erroneously taught to expect in life.
Well, that's a great point. But then she would say that, everything takes work. Nothing is just, I think, well, I guess I shouldn't say that, but maybe she wouldn't say that. But it does seem like everything that was worth doing, she felt like she wanted to put the effort into. And, for her, romance took a little bit there was a vetting process.
All right. That is a great last word on this subject. Thank you for joining us today, Laura.
Thanks, Todd. Great to be here.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. As we talked about, the next iteration of Julia Child Recipe for Life, the traveling exhibition produced and toured by Flying Fish, opens April 18th, 2025 at the Napa Valley Museum in St. Helena. Go to napavalleymuseum.org for details, and you can follow @themacnv for all the latest updates on tickets and special events. If Napa isn't near you or in your travel plans, well, as Laura was saying, it really should be Santa Barbara too. But realistically, if you live near or you plan to visit Cincinnati, the sister exhibition is also open at the Cincinnati Museum Center until mid-May before it heads to Muskegon, Michigan in late June. Find more episodes of Inside Julia's Kitchen on juliachildfoundation.org, heritageradionetwork.org, or wherever you get your podcast. Please follow @JuliaChild on Facebook and @JuliaChild Foundation on Instagram and Threads. I'm @TShulkin on Instagram and Threads. The Julia Child audio clip from The French Chef is used with permission from our friends at GBH. Thanks to my co-producer at the Foundation, Lauren Salkeld, and our sound engineer is Armin Spengen. Our theme song is New French Horn by Novi Valtorni. We look forward to bringing you back into the Foundation's world next time on Inside Julia's Kitchen. Inside Julia's Kitchen is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.